disorder lately, starting with a CBC report 2 weeks ago about the need for PTSD support for jurors on traumatic court cases, to news yesterday that a PTSD dedicated clinic is opening in Mississauga next month. But Charity Fleming feels despite the increased coverage, most people don't know what the disorder actually is. Charity co-owns Qualia Counseling and is a social worker who has worked extensively with people who have PTSD. Good morning, Charity.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. Whenever we hear about PTSD, it's always about the most extreme, soldiers who have served in Afghanistan or jurors on gruesome trials or ambulance drivers or police. What exactly is PTSD?
So PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. And it is a mental health diagnosis. It has 5 different classifications or ranges of different symptoms for the disorder. And often the first symptom talks about the actual trauma. So that's an exposure or someone actually witnessing a life-threatening situation. So often people think of things, like you said, like veterans or returning soldiers, people who have been severely abused, things like that. But there's a wide range of I would say almost typical or everyday situations that people experience that could be classified as trauma. So an example might be a car collision or a problematic labor and delivery, a miscarriage, maybe a conflict-oriented divorce. In some situations, it could even be bullying or workplace bullying, which we call lateral violence. So these are situations not necessarily where someone's life is threatened, but their safety or their physical or emotional safety feels threatened to them. So people can have these symptoms and not necessarily be a returning war veteran or not necessarily be somebody who's been exposed to horrific, a natural disaster or life-threatening situation. The other 4 symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, so one is re-experiencing the event. So often people think of flashbacks, but there could just be nightmares. There could be vivid memories that people think about throughout the day. Sometimes there's even just physical sensations. So if someone had a strong feeling of disgust during the encounter or the trauma that they experienced, that could be a physical sensation that they're re-experiencing of the trauma. The third one is avoiding things related to the trauma. So that's just reminders. So people often think of triggers here. So those are reminders of the trauma. So that could be thoughts, memories, or any kind of situation that is similar to the trauma. So a car collision, maybe just getting into the car, they're re-experiencing that trauma, that collision, and so they don't want to get back into that car. Seeing a car could be very nerve-wracking for them. 4 is a disturbance in mood or thought. So often that can be, it's post-traumatic stress disorder, so it's a stress disorder. It's characterized by anxiety, but also it can be related to symptoms of depression or insomnia. And often people have different beliefs about the world. So often it shifts from I am safe and I can cope with things and others are okay to I'm not safe, the world is dangerous and others are not okay. So example again of maybe the car collision, seeing a car, people think that's not safe anymore. Or seeing others driving, I'm not safe.
For me, it was a specific corner where I got in the accident, and every time I got to that corner, I was not overtly, but it was always that little tinge of,
fear.
Oh man, when I'd have to cross it,
and that's something very common, unfortunately. So I've read studies that up to 60% of people experience what could be labeled as a traumatic incident in their life. So it's much more common than we think. And then the last symptom is hyperarousal. So that's just being on lookout for the threat of whatever the situation was. So it's kind of being on high alert for whatever that is. And so PTSD is something, though, that can be treated. At Qualia, we focus on cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's been shown in many, many studies to be able to successfully treat the symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
If you can, just quickly, how does that manifest itself, that treatment? What do you mean by that?
So cognitive behavioral therapy, we change your thoughts and your behaviors and the situation. Specifically for trauma, what we do is we help people to face those traumatic situations or something similar to that, the triggers for them, so they can master that, so they can walk away knowing, I survived the first time, I'm resilient, and I can cope with this. And so it changes their thoughts, their beliefs about the world, and also helps them to be able to be happy again in those situations that they were previously avoiding. If you would like more information on our website at qualiacounseling.com, Qualia, we've posted some information on PTSD. Also check us out on Facebook by searching Qualia or at Qualia CBT on Twitter. And we posted some information for people on PTSD, and we also provide free consultations.
Just before we let you go, I just want to just talk briefly about the stigma around PTSD. We talk on this show a lot about the stigma around mental health. Is the stigma around PTSD different?
I think it is actually a little bit different. I would say there's a little less stigma. I think all mental health is stigmatized, but I think there's a little less stigma because we often associate it with heroes, with war heroes. So I think there's less stigma, but still a lot because people don't understand it. And there's certain symptoms. Often people, seek to numb those sensations with addictions or alcohol or other things, or there's a lot of fear and people just simply don't understand it. So I encourage everybody to just break the silence when it comes to mental health, but PTSD as well, and educate yourself, become knowledgeable, and help others to break the silence too, so they don't live in shame and they can get the help that they need.
Great stuff, Charity. Thanks for talking about this today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Charity Fleming is a social worker with Qualia Counseling, locations in Kitchener, Waterloo, and Brantford, and she's worked extensively with people suffering from PTSD. This is the Morning Edition on CBC Radio 189.1 FM. It is 7:47 now. Some special news to tell you about today. Our